Who is María Corina Machado, and why does she deserve the Nobel Peace Prize? Hello, I'm Dr. Ulf Erlingsson, and for 15 years I've been inside the Venezuelan resistance. And here in this video I will tell you the full story of the fight for freedom in Venezuela, in which María Corina Machado has been a leader for almost a quarter of a century. So let's get into it.
María Corina Machado's story is tied to the decline of Venezuela, a country that was once a prosperous democracy but fell into dictatorship and extreme poverty. After World War II, Venezuela was the fourth richest country in the world, thanks to its oil wealth. But it was still under a dictatorship. In 1958, the people overthrew the dictator and established a liberal democracy. María Corina was born in 1967, during a time when Cuba's communist regime had already tried and failed to spread its revolution to Venezuela. Still, Cuba managed to set up guerrilla movements in Colombia, which continue to this day. At 22, María Corina was studying engineering in Venezuela's strong education system. Meanwhile, Fidel Castro was planning another attempt to take power in Venezuela. In 1989, he orchestrated the Caracazo, a staged rebellion in Caracas. That, too, failed. In 1992, Castro's ally Hugo Chavez attempted a military coup, twice, but both failed. Yet, in 1999, after being released from prison, Chavez was elected president. He immediately set about rewriting the constitution to implement his socialist revolution. Venezuela's state-owned oil company, PDVSA, was the crown jewel of the nation. But Chavez fired the skilled professionals running it and replaced them with loyalists. This caused massive protests, and on April 11, 2002, 1 million people marched to demand Chavez's resignation. Chavez ordered a military response to the peaceful protest, but the military refused. He then sent a lower-ranking officer to take tanks onto the streets, but his superiors ordered him to pull back. Unfortunately, by then, the tanks had already been seen on TV, and the regime used the footage to falsely claim there had been a military coup. In reality, it was Chavez who had ordered the tanks to fire on innocent protesters. Dozens were killed by municipal forces, not the military, and the regime later murdered witnesses to cover it up. Chavez had to resign, but 2 days later the military brought him back to power. Protests continued, and civil society called for a recall election. That's where María Corina Machado and her organization Sumate played a pivotal role. They gathered the signatures needed to trigger the recall referendum, despite the Chavez regime's attempt to disqualify them by printing faulty forms. Eventually, the recall was approved. In 2004, the referendum was held, but the election authority, CNE, declared that Chavez had won, despite evidence of widespread electronic fraud. Despite this, María Corina didn't back down. She was elected to Congress and became a vocal critic of Chavez. She wouldn't let the regime silence her. In 2012, María Corina ran for president in the opposition's primary. The system by then had been rigged further, with an undersea fiber optic cable connecting Venezuela's election system to Cuba. In the October 2012 presidential election, a visibly ill Hugo Chavez was declared the winner for a third term. But he died shortly after, and Nicolás Maduro took over with the backing of Diosdado Cabello, the head of the military drug cartel, El Cartel de los Soles. The regime claimed Chavez was still alive in Cuba, but people soon realized he was dead. This sparked massive protests, with students of the non-violent resistance chaining themselves outside the Cuban embassy in Caracas. The people began to recognize the threat. The regime was turning Venezuela into a Cuban colony. In 2013, after having forced to admit that Chavez was dead, Maduro faced Henrique Capriles in an extra presidential election. Before the official results were even announced, Operación Libertad Venezuela had intercepted fraudulent results transmitted from Cuba alleging that Maduro had won and transmitted in their live broadcast that it actually was Capriles that had won. The regime's claim of victory was exposed as a lie, and Capriles called for protests. But the regime crushed them violently, and Capriles backed down immediately. By then, it was clear that the political opposition was being manipulated. The regime was financing elements in the opposition to divide and control it. They thought they could neutralize Maria Corina by portraying her as an elite, but she stayed clean, untainted by the corruption of the system. In early 2014, Maria Corina, along with fellow opposition leaders Antonio Ledesma and Leopoldo López, launched La Salida, a movement calling for discussions in street assemblies to debate what actions to take to confront the country's crisis. But the regime responded with deadly force. This sparked popular protests of the non-violent resistance, and the more the regime repressed, the more the protests grew, with an entire state falling into the hands of the resistance. But the regime brought in Cuban soldiers to suppress the uprisings. Over the next years, the regime responded to the continuous non-violent protests with a strategy that consisted of starving people to submission. They deprived the people not just of food, but also of essential medicines. By early 2018, hundreds of thousands had died from hunger, mostly young children, and by the end of the year, millions were already fleeing the country. By now, the figure has reached 8 million. But Maria Corina continued organizing, and by 2024, she led a major victory in opposition primaries that were managed by the opposition itself, not by the regime, giving them greater credibility. The regime, fearing her, barred her from running in the election. However, Maria Corina's supporters rallied behind an alternative candidate, Edmundo González Urrutia, and secretly prepared a parallel vote count. When the election results came in, they already had proof of the true outcome. The regime tried to cover it up, but Maria Corina announced that they had won. They had collected physical evidence from every polling station, which contradicted the regime's official results. After the election, the regime escalated its repression, imprisoning more political opponents. But Maria Corina's movement had already exposed the fraud. The regime's international support had weakened considerably, and today it only includes the core members of the coalition that styles itself as anti-imperialist, with Cuba and Russia being the most prominent ones. Today, Venezuela's people continue to suffer, but Maria Corina's courage and commitment to non-violence have earned her the respect of the world. Despite the ongoing repression, Venezuela's message is clear. Peace without freedom is slavery. The Venezuelan struggle for freedom is not just their battle, it's a fight for democracy everywhere. Thank you for listening. Please share this video to help spread the truth and support the cause.